And I'd like to start by mentioning the EAS yesterday. And I know from the reports I've gotten that most of Florida did not get the test. I know that Philadelphia supposedly received it, but did not transmit it. And I understand that Northwest Missouri had distorted audio. I'm pleased. I see Harold Price. I see Bill Robertson. I see Adam Jones. Maybe you guys could pop in and tell us a little bit of what you know about what happened yesterday.
Well, I live in Florida, so we saw pieces and parts of it in different places. I was monitoring several different locations. I don't know where it broke down, but there was some disturbances around it. I will say that probably the more visceral situation that has happened was a device was set up with the Linux debug thing turned on, and the output of the cable system did not switch back like it was supposed to, and there was an error message that came up there, and the error message, and this is a Linux error message that basically says that a process had halted, and should they sacrifice child? It basically says sacrifice child. That's pure Linux. It's exactly what it is, but it has created all kinds of, I'll say, fecal storm, because people didn't read it, didn't look at it. They've contacted us, and there's another sub-process that says amon-rss. One guy contacted me thinking that someone had cracked into our box and had written stuff for QAnon. All completely fabricated baloney stuff, nothing like that. It was kind of again, a couple of different things where the user had left on the debugging capability, had routed the video through, their stuff didn't turn back, and just a kind of a whole series of errors. And that's been the biggest thing that I've been impacted by, if you will, and we've got a lot of questions and comments on that. Again, various people have reached out in different forums to try to figure out what's going on, and we've been in conversations with FCC and FEMA and everything else trying to explain it. There's a very simple thing. You can actually look at the stack error on that, and it tells you exactly what's going on. But that's probably the biggest thing. I've heard the same thing, some other areas that have been impacted, different audio characteristics and things. But to this group, I would just, if you can help tamp down the baloney. QAnon was not involved. It was nothing else around it. It was a standard error message that was on because the debug was left on and they didn't switch back. So
we've also heard that WHYY in Philadelphia received the test but did not relay it. Anything that you know about that?
Yes, I'm in Philadelphia. Do you hear me?
Hi, Joyce.
Hi, how are you, Barry?
Good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you. Well, our DASDEC box decoded it and then stated that it is deactivating upon arrival. So I was looking at the DASDEC box. It looked correct. I have a call out to Digital Alert Systems. Our audio was good. I can hear the alert come in, and we'll have to troubleshoot it.
Well, that's what tests are for. So it's not necessarily a failure. It is a test.
Right.
This is Harold. Am I?
Yes, Harold.
The repeater, as they say. There we go. We didn't see anything that hadn't been seen before from the Sage side. There are cases where if a station high up in the chain gets bad audio or has some sort of mishap, then everybody that monitors that will get the same error. I saw some comments in the remailers about, well, the box ought to get all the alerts and decide which one's the best one and put that one on the air. And of course, there's no good way of accomplishing that. Other than that, yeah, there was various places that were monitoring these things at the high end of the chain, and they put alerts in the air, but they had questionable audio, or in some cases, no audio at all. I'm not aware of any problems from FEMA, the very top of the chain. The audio from there was apparently good. NPR squawk was apparently good, although some people reported that it faded out near the end, but not everybody did. In most cases, the problems that occurred also happened on the previous monthly tests. People need to be paying as much attention to the monthly tests as they do to this yearly event. Enough said about that, I think. And cases where users would write in saying, I didn't get the NPT, what happened? And we'd ask for the log file, and it turned out they hadn't received anything since November. That's a failure to check in every week. There were some stations that received the alert, but it didn't actually get to the air. And the most humorous example, and somebody still owes me a steak on this, we said, well, take the cables out of the back of the end deck and see if you're still on the air. And the answer is always, well, yeah, I guess the index's not in the air chain. Well, true enough. The guy said, I know absolutely it's in the air chain, and you owe me a steak if I pull this off and it leaves the air, and it didn't. And he says, well, I'll get back to you. So in all of those cases, in a large number of cases where it wasn't bad audio from higher up in the chain, it was something that could have been resolved had a little closer attention been paid. Now, there are some things that happen on the day, so I don't want to throw everybody on the bus, but there are significant example of folks who had an opportunity during the weekly test or the monthly test before then to find the error and correct it. And a lot of people are unnecessarily afraid of filing a report to the FCC saying they didn't do something. Don't be. Nobody yet has received any bad mark in their permanent record from the FCC for accurately reporting that they didn't carry the alert. The FCC is mostly interested in that a problem was found and the problem was fixed. They're not too worried about, yeah, you didn't put it on and here's your NAL for $8,000. Don't worry about that.
Quite true. There was, of course, a little flurry some years ago about a station when the EOM didn't happen, and the EB decided to cite them, which was just absolutely ridiculous. It was a test, but you're right that in terms of the NPT, what we are most concerned about is, did you get it? How did it sound? I know that there are certain areas. I know that there are areas out there where there is a lot of distortion. I've got some files that folks sent me, and I imagine you do too, Harold. I imagine Bill and Mr. Czarnecki popped in here. You may have some files, awfully distorted audio, some that had no audio. We might visit this a little bit later. But we could also return to the EAS if someone has some further comments on the NPT yesterday in terms of audio quality. I know from several notes here, those that got it off the NPR squawk channel did very, very well. Those that pulled it off of some of the PEP stations didn't do quite so well. There were several storms. I think one of them was up in Michigan State, was it? Going on at the same time as the test. And that made AM reception a problem, which was part of the problem in 2019, where some stations were not able to get their signal out because of storms.
AOPP came out nice and clear, both of them.
Mm-hmm. One thing I did hear over these past two things is, and if Harold's still with us, I don't know. Maybe I can check here real quickly.
I'm here.
Oh, good. One of the things I've heard is that, and it's just not for the NPT, but it's all the time, the input levels are so important that they don't go over, what, a -3?
It's not the input levels per se, it's the entire audio chain. What happens if you get to plus 20 dB on the XLR output, which is what, plus or minus 12 volts or so, the way our system is built? That's plus or minus 18. That's too high. And what happens is that output loops back into the inputs. There's little crosstalk amongst the 6 inputs themselves, but if you got the system turned up so loud, so high, what you're doing is really hearing yourself. One of the ways to keep that from happening is to reduce the inputs. The best way to do it is to reduce the outputs. There's a white paper we wrote years ago, and it still applies. It's on the website. Go to the FAQ page. It's service bulletin number 1. And it discusses what the audio chain is inside the NDEC, the 6 different points at which you can make adjustments to the levels. The point of the multiple adjustment points is you want to reduce the noise and keep the signal. If you mistune the thing, you can be pumping up the noise and the signal at the same time, which is not what you want. Anyway, read that document and it will describe what to do. So again, it's not the sensitivity of the inputs, it's that you can incorrectly tune the whole thing to be too loud on the output side. Now it is possible, and this happens all the time, people have wiring and it was put in 8 years ago by some other engineer, maybe 3 engineers ago, and now it's all loose and there's capacitive coupling between the monitor inputs. So in fact, one radio is triggering monitor 1 and monitor 2. If the grounding isn't right, if you don't have them all hooked up right, that can be an issue, and that's equally common. The problem with, not the problem with, but the design constraints of the PEP system, by the time most stations who aren't LP stations get the alert, it's already been relayed through 2 AM stations. Right? It goes to the PEP, goes to the LP1, and then you hear it. So the audio is not pristine at that point, and I'm unaware of the fine details of how FEMA gets it from where they originated from to the PEPs, but of course it's gone through a distribution hop there as well. The intent is not to deliver pure audio in multiple languages. The intent is to be a 4th or 5th level backup when everything really hits the fan. So you're not going to get the best quality audio because of the way this works. Now, some people have put, not patches in, not workarounds necessarily, but there are other ways of getting audio direct from the PEP to the stations. One is the NPR squawk. They get it, I think, direct from a source in Washington. So that's already been through 2 less hops. So it's not a surprise that that audio is better. If you didn't hear it from your LP1 and heard it from some other source, maybe it's 4 hops by the time you get it. I'm in Pittsburgh. There was a lightning storm during the alert. I couldn't hear, now I don't have an external antenna, but I couldn't hear the local LP1 AM station, well, also the PEP station. So I was going through a minor panic. We had the national, a conference call, and Al Kenyon says, 4, 3, 2, 1, send. And I heard it originate, but the NDEC here didn't pick it up. The rack full of index here, and I'm going, oh, that's not good. But then 17 seconds after that, it heard it from another station I was monitoring, which is the way the system's supposed to work. So yeah, the audio is not going to be the best. This system is a backup to a backup to a backup if it ever has to be used in anger for an EAN.
Good point. Appreciate that.
Hey,
Hey,
Barry.
Barry, I'd like to tell you of my experience with the test yesterday on my cell phone. Bob Gonset sent me an FCC release, and in there was information of what you have to go through to enable the iPhone to decode to receive the test, and I did that. And sure enough, yesterday, I think it was at 11:22, my pocket started making noises, so I pulled out my cell phone and heard the test come in, and the audio quality was not fantastic, but it was not bad. And then when the audio ended, there was some really strange noises there, kind of thumping and bumping for a few seconds. And then it did the closing tone, and basically I received it quite well on my cell phone.
I'll follow that up by commenting. It's in the chat if you want to roll back. but there was a page on the FCC site that explains it's very convoluted, but how you can set your iPhone or your Android phone to respond to tests or alerts and tests. And then again, we have to remember that not all cell providers bother to send them through in the first place.
Oh, I might follow up. Bob Gonsa sent me another email this morning because he experienced the same thing I did. It came in as a text message and then it did the audio, but the text message disappeared very quickly. And I mentioned to Bob that it told him what my experience was. And he did some Google searching and found out there's a procedure, which he did. I haven't bothered to do it yet, but he did it and was able to bring that text message back into his phone. So maybe a little later here, I'll play around and try that.
I know this is a radio crowd, but I watched it on the cable system. I actually wasn't watching, then suddenly I noticed the program audio went away and I looked and there was a screen up, kind of a gray screen that said, I think EAS page 1 of 1. And that's all it said. And I kept watching and it was over a minute later that some text finally appeared. So it got there, but it took it a while.
Oh, I forgot to mention, at the time I received this, I was at KBLA, and within a minute or so after I got it on my cell phone, when I went on the air on KBLA, I didn't think to turn on the monitor for KYPA or run over to next door to the KHJ transmitter to see what they did. So I missed those two, but KBLA did run it, and the audio quality was okay on KBLA.
Washington, D.C. was a bit of a mixed bag. The cable system, Comcast, displayed their blue screen seamlessly. It was pretty good, except for the audio quality. Verizon had much the same gray screen experience that Marvin just relayed in the D.C. area. Of course, I saw it in Virginia, but I get the EAS feed from Hagerstown, Maryland, which makes no sense, but there it is. 6 radio stations being monitored. The LP1 had really good audio, good tones, good audio, clean EOM, but it went downhill from there pretty quickly. Of the other 5 stations, we had 2 which had degraded audio at the end, barely audible at the end of the message, and then loud EOM. The others had good tones, but the audio sounded like it was being rebroadcast from deep inside of a garbage can. So something happened with the audio between the LP1 and the other the radio receivers downstream. But that's kind of a random sample of what I observed across 2 cable systems and 6 radio stations in the market. And of course, in a crowd, nobody got the WIA because nobody programmed their phones to receive a test message.
Hey, Barry, I got a question. Has there ever been a successful 100% test?
Of anything?
Of the EAS. Has there ever been 100% success rate?
What's your criteria for success?
It worked everywhere.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and nothing ever works everywhere. It's interesting to follow the PubTech feed and see that there's a bunch of professionals who care about this and try to get it right. And they've got multiple levels of support. And every day there's the dead audio in some program or other. And I'm not trying to throw those guys under the bus at all. They know what they know what they're doing. But it's hard to get 100% of anything to work.
I realize that we're a large country and we're covering a large area because obviously we've seen the success rate of notifications go in small countries. I was just wondering if the United States has ever had a success rate. And
well, I mean, if you look at what's going on in Canada, I mean, they've got real challenges as well. But one of my issues, and maybe Bill Robertson wants to chime in on this one. One of my issues here is this big, pre-advertised, high-stress, multi-form national EAS test every year, where what we've seen, or I've seen anecdotally, is people rushing in to tweak things they shouldn't tweak, and they may have botched it up by touching things. When in reality, all we're doing with this test is a glorified required monthly test, quite honestly. I had my comments to the FCC offline yesterday that, you know what, you're making a lot out of nothing here. And it's not an honest test of the system if you are, really priming people so much to make sure everything works to the point that they touch something and they break it. But that's maybe, a subclass of errors we saw yesterday.
So Ed, to chime in on top of that, and I might be the heretic here, because we are setting these things up and saying we're testing once per year. Tell me some other system of this scale and magnitude that you only get to test once per year. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do it all the time, but what's interesting is you can subdivide the NPT. It doesn't have to be national in its scope. We could test like the Eastern time zone. We could test, different states. So we could come up with, say, quarterly tests of different elements and be able to test it, and then perhaps once per year test that on a national scale. But at least if we test it more frequently, and again, not put this undue pressure and concern and this over the top type of reaction to it. If we test more frequently, we can find the errors, we can find the issues, we can set the audio levels the way they should be, we can make sure that the boxes are working right. But a once per annum test is really a really poor way for us to try to do something that's on this particular scale. So, I mean, again, I might be a heretic because I'm trying to say we should test more often, but I think that's the only way from an engineering standpoint you're going to be able to resolve a lot of these issues.
Not only that,
what I said at the beginning, a lot of the errors that we saw, not all of them, but a lot of them could have been found in the monthly test that appeared the month before. Not a monthly test through CAP, mind you, because that's a single hop to you, but a monthly test through the legacy system. And if people would schedule those, one of the 12 monthly tests that gets done, make sure it's not done through CAP, but over the air, and people pay attention to it like they do for the NPT, every NPT would be better.
Well, I've raised the question several times to the FCC and in general. Each state, SECC, should know if they got complete coverage of their state, and if not, find the reasons. And this to me was probably somewhere where the SBE should have been taking the lead because of having people all over the place. But if you've got a thing like MNet in the state of Michigan, as an example, they know exactly how many stations got the tests, how many of them relayed it, or whatever they did. Other states, nobody knows anything. And I asked...
That's not exactly true. In EMNet, you'd know it if it was relayed over EMNet, but if it's relayed over the PEP or the LPU system, you might not get that feedback from the remote device.
Very, very good point. And again, this is why I asked the FCC, I asked several of the state groups, who's checking? Who's checking to find out? Adrian Abbott pointed out that in Nevada, the PEP doesn't cover the whole state by itself. And so what do you do? How do you test this system to its availability to all stations? And we haven't done that, as was just said by Ed. Throwing out a test once a year, Harold, this doesn't really, number one, it doesn't give you a clear vision of what's actually out there, and it doesn't really allow for proper follow-up. Who's following up?
Well, that's the issue there, and that's the fallacy of ETRS, perhaps, is that the people who are best equipped to help follow up, find out what the errors are, don't have access to the data. It is possible to reconstruct things. Was assisting somebody saying this station got pristine audio and the other one didn't, and why is that? And it was trivial to look up the station that got pristine audio, see if they were an NPR station. They were. Chances are high then that they heard it from the NPR squawk, and in fact they did. Looking at the ETRS data, we can't get it. If we got a sanitized version, it would be useless. Getting the raw counts, 94% of the stations reported that they received it, and 87% reported that they sent it. That doesn't help anybody fix anything. I said back at NAB in 2012, when I could actually see the blood drain from people's faces up on the stage, if they wanted to know this stuff, it's a trivial matter to set up a server and have every station report every alert to it. And then you could see who didn't get a monthly test and figure out to a large extent who did, who didn't, what the actual transmission changes are, and find out your information on a weekly basis and on a monthly basis for the monthly test, on a yearly basis for the NPT. The mere thought of the government prying into every station's lives and in a sense having them automatically report violations, nobody wanted to go there. But some states do that. Larry Wilkins in Alabama, it gets a FTP upload of all the systems in the state, and he knows within minutes who put on an alert and who didn't. Now, what he knows is
Larry Wilkins doesn't have an enforcement bureau.
I'm saying that the data can be the data could be available if we wanted it to be.
Hold on, we got three people trying to talk at once. Ed, you were next, I think.
Yeah, I'm one of those that are not sanguine over the idea of an automatic data collection system unless
we've just
boundaries, regulatory boundaries on the FCC for once on how they can use that data. I'm sorry. What I was saying is I'm not a fan. I'm not sure why that is. My point was that I'm not a fan of the government agency having automatic auditing capability unless they have very clear regulatory boundaries on how they can use that data. Essentially, if this becomes a pipeline to the EB, you miss a test, you automatically get a fine. That's my Orwellian fear here, as well as a lot of other people at NAB and other entities. If technologically, easy, quite honestly. But it's a slippery slope unless there are some guidance, some rules on how the government can use this information, not abuse it, and not automatically come after broadcasters for having an oops. They do that.
Absolutely. And I think the FCC has been fairly good, having had a clear view into what people thought it should be done. If we use the Costa Mesa as the example, they meant to send a weekly instead of monthly, or maybe it's the other way around. And they got a fine. And I think the industry kind of stood up as a whole and said, no, this being an LP1 is voluntary. You want to have everybody volunteer to not do it, enforce that payment against Costa Mesa. And the FCC did back down on that. And they've done a lot less of that sort of thing. But yes, the risk is that it gets abused. The downside is we don't find out the data. We go through this ETRS system, which doesn't really provide the data we need. And we do have this fire drill once a year. On the other hand, the attention that gets paid to EAS once a year is better than not. We had 100 or more systems that hadn't been updated since as long ago as 2012. And I'm sure that those stations would not have updated had they not seen, heard, and do have that fear of they're required to fill out that ETS form. It's one thing to simply not do anything and not point it out. It's another to make the decision to lie to the FCC on a form that carries weight. And that does shake the tree every year and gets more people to be compliant than weren't. So that's worth it. But I've always said, if you've got to fail so publicly, it is very difficult to run this test as often as you need to.
Okay.
And that's the downside of the NPT.
Okay, Phil, I think you were next.
Barry, can I throw something in there?
Yes.
One of the main problems, you mentioned the EB. I'm Mr. EB. The people that are making the decisions never had to go out and do field inspections. They never had to go out and deal with the station people on boots on the ground. That's one of the big problems. Now, as far as regular checks for some reason, they didn't want to take the example that the PSAPs, the 911 centers use. Every 911 center gets a phone call once a day from the police or fire agency that they dispatch to make sure that they're still around. And once a day, they have to call into the state to make sure they're still around. Then there's no problem. You know whether somebody has a problem and you know whether somebody, and the difference between a violation and a problem. And unfortunately, except for the guys who actually went out and did field inspections, some of the people at headquarters don't know the difference.
As far as being the one observation was, we do this as a race to the finish or last minute panic. The stations that I do primarily, we had set up weeks or months, a year ago, 2 or 3 days ago, as we got closer, some of the mom and pop stations, like one station in Oklahoma, mom called, pop, who built the station, has been hospitalized for months. He's in, assisted living these days. The vendors were terrific. I mean, we're better than terrific. We were downloading software and answering questions half an hour before the test came across. And I had just checked the emailer, and like 20 minutes later, okay, we have a test, and I have a text from mom saying it worked. And I said, okay, this was sensational. So Sage was great. Digital alerting was great. I do think we did so much better in 2019 because we had done it for a couple of years running. I know why we didn't do it in 2020, and it's a good reason, but you let 2 years go by and a lot of things get forgotten or sloughed off, or people get busy, or the phone rang and it was something else.
Mr. Klein, I think you have something to contribute.
Thank you, Barry. I'm an NPR, or I'm not an NPR station, but we loosely affiliated. We get our national public test through the NPR Squawk over the satellite, and it worked really well. But I was surprised it worked really well because NPR only sends weekly tests. They only send the RWT. They never do required monthly tests. To my knowledge, we've never had a two-tone attention signal from NPR come into our Sage box. So frankly, I was glad it worked, and I was also very surprised it worked, because for years and years of monitoring NPR for our PEP source, we don't ever get anything with two-tone attention signals. And as far as I know, this is the first time. And so just kind of interested in anybody's comments about the NPR only doing weekly tests, which, so, you don't have a full, you don't even have a monthly test to compare to the NPT in that case. So kind of a weird deal there. Go ahead, thanks.
Hey, Barry?
It probably depends a little on your local plan and your state plan, what actually can originate a required monthly test. I know in LA it's the sheriff's EOC, and that's the only valid source.
Right, but doesn't Sirius XM do monthly tests?
I think the answer to that is yes, and it's on the Barker channel. If you have a radio that outputs audio but it isn't authorized for regular broadcast, I think the Barker channel actually carries those.
Okay, but
yes, that's what Eric Haynes said.
Nobody takes those and then relays them like they would a normal monthly.
I believe Richard Rudman said he was monitoring those.
He said he thought it was a great idea, and he had a station that he was going to do that. He was pretty jazzed by that. And in the Texas plan, I didn't have a lot to do with it, but we have a system where anyone in a town smaller than mine will die, or at least miss the message. That was not a plan, although it does sound like something I would do. The Sirius XM radio out to some of these places that have no connections is, I think that's very good, because we have people who are monitoring weather service. Weather service from Midland to points southwest is not as dependable as your average AM daytimer. And that's very sad. The number of those where the transmitter will be up, but there will be no audio for a week at a time is pretty high. You get places like Fort Stockton and Alpine and Marfa where you discover they're monitoring each other and have been for ages.
Okay, Nebraska state plan, it's a requirement to directly monitor a PEP source. So that's going to be like, well, for instance, Nebraska has KRVN, which is an AM, and that's a PEP. That's, it's AM, so that's kind of out.
And it's a good choice in the western half of the state at night, but it's not a great.
Now the other choices that we have are NPR and Sirius XM, but those are a requirement in our state plan. And just based on, well, I got one email yesterday. I'm a state relay, so everybody in the Omaha metro area is listening to me, but everybody in the Omaha metro area, because they're under the state plan, should have gotten their NPT from one of 3 direct PEP sources and not from me. And, there's clearly a lot of people who haven't bothered to read the state plan. And the one guy who contacted me, he sent me, that weird audio that has crosstalk and everything that a lot of people have been talking about in a lot of areas of the country. That's the audio that he got. He sent it to me, and he said he was monitoring me and an LP1 station. He thought he got it from me, and I sent him a file of our alert as it was picked up by an off-air receiver and recorded. A skim recording of, from an off-air receiver of what our alert was like when it went out. It was near perfect. Didn't sound anything like what he had. So he was getting his from someplace else. I think he did say he had Sirius XM, but I'm not sure what happened there, but in the ensuing conversations, he had said a few other things that triggered me to think, well, this guy hasn't really ever looked at the state plan. And of course, that's kind of getting off of my original subject, but
I'll tie them together. And again, there are those who don't like the daisy chain at all. They want to simply do it off the internet, which I think is absolutely the stupidest thing to do. As we know, whenever there is a flood or a power outage or other things, the internet dies, just like the cell phone service. So really, the daisy chain needs to be maintained just from the standpoint of being able to alert people in a major emergency. And there's no reason why the SECCs in each state cannot be tasked. I mean, they're being asked to do an awful lot, as far as I'm concerned, and feeding their state plans to a site where nobody can see it except the FCC. But the SECC should be able to coordinate to know that all the stations in a state, all the cable systems in a state receive the alerts and broadcast them. To me, this is not brain surgery. But
the missing link is the requirement to actually then listen to what your station put on the air. If you simply look at the log, all you know is the index tried its best to get it on the air, but it doesn't mean that it actually went on the air, and it doesn't opine as to what the quality of the audio is, either as it left the index or as it actually was received in an off-air thing.
And that's why we do that. Just, you know, first off, as a state relay, if there's any kind of problem, we have a good way to go and check it. I also keep one of the old gray Sage boxes, and it's monitoring us off air. So I can also tell if all the components of the alert worked, you know, from a receive the alert on a Sage box standpoint. So we've got multiple ways to confirm that what we did was either right or wrong. You know, did we add to the problem or did we not? You know, we're in the largest metropolitan area in the state, and I'm the state relay, you know, that just kind of seems like a good thing to be doing, because there's going to be people that have questions. Now, on the other hand, the other thing I also do is I tend to communicate with all the other stations in the area. I've got a list of who's out there who's supposed to be monitoring us. And when something comes along related to EAS, they're not all necessarily subscribed to this or that or whatever, or even you know, you have to opt in to the state's SECC website to get information from them. So I pass that information along, and you know, if I have comments to add to it, I do that. But you know, and the last time we just recently had the state plan was sent out. It was updated again. I think it might have just been some grammar, or you know, a period was in a different place or something, and there wasn't anything that really significantly changed what was in the plan. But you know, I have been forwarding this information to our local group, and so
well, this harks back to the dark old days when every station monitored or was monitored by somebody, making the state plans contingent upon the LP1 or LP2. That may not have been the best thing. Of course, now we talk about the hardware. We talk about the number of receivers that can be hooked up and the number of things that can be heard by a given station. But if every station in an area was monitored by somebody else, we'd find out if these things worked.
And I think the station that this other station was monitoring, I had also heard that the EAS or the NPT that had gone through that station was one of the ones that sounded bad. And he said, well, says, we're supposed to monitor this station. I said, no, they're not on the required monitoring list anymore. And if you didn't have them in there, you might have gotten the alert from another source that, you know, had it clean, because you would have been monitoring me or a PEP. And you know, I don't really know exactly what all went wrong there, but I can tie a lot of the problem that he brought to me to them not keeping up with what's going on with the stuff.
Do we have any other SECC chairs, co-chairs with us this afternoon that might want to address this?
Hey, Barry, could I just say an opinion real quick?
You usually do.
I kind of disagree with you that, yes, I agree that the daisy chain should be maintained, but I also think that the internet should be involved in the EAS, especially with the advent of being able to localize something with the DNS, because in the home nowadays, smart speakers are prevalent. They might be listening to a radio station, but there's not many tabletop radios anymore, and more people are listening to streaming than ever before. So I think the EAS is important, and I think it should be adopted that it is sending out to the smart speakers.
That's along with everything else. It should be added to the system.
That was not the point. The point was that we need to maintain at least the framework of the daisy chain, because when the flood hits, when the hurricane hits, when the power outage hits, there's no internet. It's not there.
Right, but
during
the problem is right now we're only depending on one side of that, and yeah, the internet can go out very easily, as quick as a cut wire. But the thing is, it should never be discounted, so it should be included.
Nobody is discounting the internet, nor are we discounting the NPR Squawk channel or the XM Sirius Squawk channel, or Barker, or whatever you want to call it. The point is, you can't rely on just one. And there are politicians or bureaucrats that think the internet is all there is to worry about. And this whole test yesterday was purposely set up to show when the electric goes out, when the cell system bogs down.
What worked?
What worked? That is the question. And that is what we're not coming up with the answer to, because of the way this ETRS is set up as a bureaucratic exercise in collecting data that you won't see for 6 or 18 months.
Okay, then we're on the same page then. Okay.
I wanted to mention,
it all needs to be working together somehow, and there's a lot of stuff going different directions. It's kind of preventing that.
Yes, and that's why I'm glad that we have Harold and Bill and Ed here today, because I don't know if we give them the feedback and they take it off to CISRIC or the FCC or whatever. But the point is that there are certain things that are easy to do. There's certain things that are not so easy to do, given the framework of gear that's out there now. If we were to redesign EAS today, it would probably have a different look to it. Harold, you were wanting to say something.
Oh, I was just saying about the importance of actually looking at the end product. I recorded 6 of the local TV stations, and also Dish TV, a non-local station. And there's a real mixed bag of quality there, having to do with the whether the audio got ducked or not. It goes from very minimum, but not zero, original program background material to EAS being at or slightly less than the program material, to where the two mix together and you can't tell them apart. And the speed at which the crawl goes across the screen varies rapidly, to the point where I couldn't read it, and I'm a pretty good reader, and I knew what the message said. Zoom, off it went. And these are constant complaints. And while it's possible, it may be unlikely that the NPT gets processed with its crawl any differently than the monthly test. If it didn't duck the NPT, it's probably not ducking the required monthly test either. And somebody should realize that and have fixed it years ago. But here we are in 2021, and that kind of stuff is still going on. I was very surprised, actually, that Dish interrupted the channels that weren't local channels. So I guess I was more surprised they didn't also interrupt the local channels. But they interrupted, I guess I was watching, recording CNN. And it actually went quite well. Readable crawl, it had the Dish logo on it, so I could tell that they'd done the insert, not somebody else. Audio quality was good, don't know where they got it from. So I think on the whole, we tend to focus on what went wrong, as we should. That's the whole point of the test. You shouldn't pat yourself in the back, oh yeah, this went really well. You should really drill into the pieces that didn't work. But it's worth it to step back and say, a great deal of the stations got intelligible audio. Some didn't get anything, some was unintelligible, but for the large part, I think a lot of people got something, and that something met the minimum requirement for intelligibility.
Yep. Ed?
Just a quick point on building on the positive here. One thing I did notice, coincidentally, both firsthand and from feedback from other people in DC market area, were a number of broadcasters that had incorporated some of the display elements in the NVISA VIDS specification or VIDS guidelines. NVISA is Next Gen Video Information Systems Alliance, and VIDS is a video interactive symbology. Well, Bill can fix me on what the VID stands for, but there are improvements, and NVISA, which is a group I'm working with, issued guidelines for video service providers
that that are being taken up in terms of the color of the background, the placement of the banner, the speed of the crawl, the legibility. We saw a market improvement this year over past, and you know, I did note the differences between the presentation of this NPT test and a traditional EAS message or an actual warning message. So they're definitely using parts of the VID specification, which is extremely gratifying to see. And I think it is an improvement in the visual display. Of course, it's not in every market, but at least in the DC area, I think the visual display improved a whole lot from 2019.